The juxtaposition of Lamentations 2:11 through 14 and the song that we just sang is intentional. We read Lamentations 2:11 through 14 and it's terrible. One chapter later, Lamentations 3, we have the steadfast love of the Lord. That song comes from Lamentations 3, one chapter after, really all throughout the rest of the book of Lamentations, the midst of sorrow and mourning and crying and sadness and terrible things, but the steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. Today is going to be a hard day of sermons. It's going to be a difficult day of sermons for two reasons. Tonight we're going to talk about the Babylonian exile. It's going to be intellectually challenging. Let's say that. Intellectually challenging as we're thinking about the names and the dates and the process of the exile and the return and where do the different parts of the Bible fit into that. I would encourage you in the back, there is a chart on the Babylonian exile that you look over if you want to be prepared for tonight. Look over that and familiarize yourself with some names and dates as we talk about that this evening. This morning, not intellectually challenging. This morning is emotionally challenging. Lamentations is, in my estimation, one of the hardest books to read in the whole Bible. I almost feel like we need a content warning on this sermon. Not because it's hard to understand, not because, you read something like Numbers or Leviticus and it's challenging to get through because it doesn't feel intellectually stimulating. You're just reading the same numbers over and over and over. Rather, as we read Lamentations, it is brutal. It is visceral. It is agonizing. As to reread some of the things that are being lamented over the fall of Jerusalem, it is challenging to read and to maintain composure. And I'm just going to warn you now, this sermon will be emotional. As we think about a lament, one of the most poignant laments in the entire Bible. We set the stage in 2 Kings 25, verse 1. 2 Kings 25, in the 9th year of his reign, in the 10th month, on the 10th day of the month, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came with all his army against Jerusalem and laid siege to it. The laying siege is an important part of the story. 588 to 586, 2 years of siege. As an army is surrounding the city, what is inevitably going to happen? They're going to run out of food because they can't get food, right? He laid siege to it. The built siege works all around it. So the city was besieged until the 11th year of King Zedekiah. On the 9th day of the 4th month, the famine was so severe in the land that there was no food for the people of the land. This is what you're going to see in Lamentations a lot as we read through Lamentations. Verse 8. In the 5th month, on the 7th day of the month, that was the 19th year of King Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, Nebuzaradan. What great names. You could name your kid Nebuzaradan if you wanted to. The captain of the bodyguard, a servant of the king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem. He burned the house of the Lord, the king's house, and all the houses of Jerusalem. Every great house he burned down. The army of the Chaldeans who were with the captain of the guard broke down the walls of Jerusalem. And the rest of the people who were left in the city, the deserters who had deserted to the king of Babylon, together with the rest of the multitude, Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, carried into exile. This is the stage of Lamentations. Lamentations written shortly after the fall of Jerusalem. The writer witnessing its destruction and its siege. The writer paints a lot of pictures of what's going on in the city as it's being besieged, as things are happening, and then after, as it's destroyed and it's conquered. The buildings are broken down, the walls are broken down. It is into this context that Lamentations is written. And it is constructed in an interesting way. If you look at Lamentations, it's 5 chapters, 5 different poems that are pieced together. There's deeply personal struggles. There's personifications of Jerusalem, writing from the city's perspective. It ends with a communal plea to Yahweh in their toil and their struggle and their exile. It is very structured. Chapters 1 and 2 and chapters 4 and 5 are 22 verses. You'll note they are so arranged in a very precise way based on the Hebrew alphabet. Chapter 3 is 66 verses. That is 3 times 22. The book is constructed in a lament to, heighten the lament of Israel. But chapter 3, the longest chapter, which again, 3 times the length of the other chapters, chapter 3 is not really about lament. It is about hope. It is about in the midst of the struggle, in the midst of the destruction, in the midst of the horror, can we still look to God in hope? As we think about Lamentations, lays bare attention at the heart of sin and suffering and judgment and consequence. We're going to talk a lot about this tension today. On the one hand, we inherited God's sense of justice. He has given that to us. We look at the punishment of evil, and we can all admit it. When evil people are punished, there is a sense of satisfaction, right? There is. When we know that people deserve consequence, and there is a satisfaction in the punishment of the wicked. On the other hand, we all understand the value of mercy. I love it. I don't know, love. There's a deep part of us that loves when evil people are punished, as long as it's not me, right? As long as it's not my sin, not my wrongdoing. I like it when other people get what they deserve, but man, don't give me what I deserve, right? We understand mercy in that way. Many people struggle with the idea of wrath, God's judgment. How could it be so fierce or horrible? You read through Lamentations, and some of the stuff to read in Lamentations, we're going to read some of it today, is very difficult to stomach. And that's even in the context of a physical destruction of Jerusalem. What about wrath at the end of time? What about eternal wrath, eternal consequence, eternal damnation? How can God's wrath be so horrible? And really at the heart of Israel's story, as we've been reading through the Bible, at the heart of Israel's story is a lesson about sin and consequence, which really is applicable, necessary for people of all generations until Jesus comes back. God's nature calls us to himself, but he also utterly rejects our sin. He must. He has to. It's part of who he is. And at the heart of Israel's story then is sin and consequence. God wants to be with us. We sin constantly in rebellion, and that sin has consequence. The lament over Jerusalem's fall then, as we read through Lamentation, we're not going to read through all of it. As we read through Lamentations, the fall of Jerusalem and the exile of Israel should inform how we feel, how we think about these difficult ideas: sin and consequence and wrath and judgment and ultimately mercy. Because that is the plea of the book of Lamentations. Give us mercy. Show mercy on us. And yet, Lamentations is written from the perspective of a people who have not seen that mercy, who have in fact seen the wrath that has been poured out on this city. First of all, we should note, as we're going to go in order of chapters today, Lamentations chapter 1, we'll be reading not all of it, but a lot of Lamentations. Lamentations chapter 1, beginning in verse 12, we should lament, first of all, that sin has consequence. That should make us lament. When we talk about lament, what does that mean? Mourn, to be sad, to grieve. A lament is a kind of structured grief, that we are pouring out our sorrow and our mourning and our sadness over a particular thing. In this case, it's the consequence and the destruction of Israel. But as the first poem is constructed, there are reminders that what is happening in Israel is ultimately a result of sin and its consequence. Lamentations 1 verse 12, we'll read a bunch of Lamentations 1. Lamentations 1 beginning in verse 12. Is it nothing to you, all who pass by, to look and see? This is written from the personification of the city, as if the city itself were talking. Is it nothing to you, all who pass by, look and see? Is there any sorrow like my sorrow, which is brought upon me, which the Lord inflicted on the day of his fierce anger? From on high he sent fire, into my bones he made it descend. He spread a net for my feet, he turned me back, he has left me stunned and faint all the day long. My transgression bound into a yoke, by his hand fastened together and set upon my neck. He has caused my strength to fail. The Lord gave me into the hands of those whom I cannot withstand. Verse 15, the Lord rejected all my mighty men in my midst. He summoned an assembly against me to crush my young men. The Lord has trodden as in a winepress the virgin daughter of Judah. The struggle at the heart of Lamentations is this. This great destruction brought on Israel is not ultimately the fault of the Chaldeans, the Babylonians. Not their fault. They're the instruments of God's will. But the author of Lamentations wants the reader to really be aware that what is happening to Israel is by God's doing. Why? Because of transgression. My transgressions have been bound together and set upon my neck. What is befalling the city of Jerusalem is really the thing that they deserve, that God has told them over and over all throughout we've been reading in the story of the Bible, reading through the Old Testament, all throughout the prophets, the pre-exilic prophets. If you do not change, this is what will happen. If you do not come back to me, this is what I will do. God says over and over and over. And how does this begin? Is it nothing to you, all who pass by? Do I not deserve some lament? Do I not deserve some sorrow for what's happening to me? Yeah, it was my fault. But should that not cause some emotion in those who see what is happening? We keep reading in verse 16. For these things I weep. My eyes flow with tears. A comforter is far from me, one to revive my spirit. My children are desolate, for the enemy has prevailed. Zion stretches out her hands, but there is none to comfort her. The Lord has commanded against Jacob, and his neighbors should be his foes. Jerusalem has become a filthy thing among them. The Lord is in the right. Think about how much spiritual discipline it takes to write that sentence. As you've looked around, and for the past 2 years, famine has become worse and worse and worse. And eventually the Babylonians came and they broke down the walls. They burned all of the important buildings with fire. To write, the Lord is in the right. The Lord is in the right, for I have rebelled against his word. But hear, all you peoples, and see my suffering. My young women and my young men have gone into captivity. Sin has consequence, but that doesn't mean that it should be an emotionless thing. That doesn't mean that we see the consequence of sin and we feel nothing over it. Sin has consequence, and what is happening to Jerusalem is the thing that God said that would happen. And yet there still should be some emotional reaction when we see the consequence of sin. The natural inclination may be, serves you right, but if the consequence of sin does not cause some lament in us, we do not have the right perspective. Because it's someone else today, and tomorrow who is it going to be? It's going to be me, and my sin, and my consequence. And I look around at what's happening to other people, and I may think, serves you right. But I only think that because it's not me and people that I love. Sin has consequence, and we should mourn over that consequence. Even when suffering is, and I've got deserved in air quotes here. We'll talk about why that is at the end of the sermon. Even when suffering is deserved, it should still be a mournful thing. The suffering of those around you should make you feel sad. And if it does not, then you have closed your heart. More specifically, and we think about as we expand the application of this, we should lament that the consequence of sin so often affects those who are innocent. It's not just those who sin that they get to suffer and they have consequence for it. What's happening in Jerusalem, as we read some of the more difficult passages of Lamentations, what's happening in Jerusalem is that those who did not do anything wrong, those who could not possibly have done anything wrong, they are suffering because of the consequence of other people's sin. Lamentations chapter 2, verse 11. Lamentations 2:11. My eyes are spent with weeping, my stomach churns. This is what we read a minute ago. My bile is poured out on the ground because of the destruction of the daughter of my people, because infants and babies faint in the streets of the city. Hey, guess what? The infants and babies wasn't their fault. They didn't do anything wrong. They're struggling under the famine that is coming upon the city because of the siege. Ultimately, the destruction and the exile. It's not their fault. The writer weeps because sin's consequence does not just affect the sinner. They cry to their mothers, 'Where is bread and wine?' as they faint like a wounded man in the streets of the city. Their life is poured out on their mother's bosom. What can I say for you? To what compare you, O daughter of Jerusalem? What can I liken to you that I may comfort you, O virgin daughter of Zion? Your ruin is as vast as the sea. Who can heal you?" What's the answer? To what can I compare you? The answer is nothing. What can I possibly say? How could I possibly comfort you? What would I possibly say to make this better? And the answer is a lot of times nothing. There's nothing to say. Think about all the horrible things that go on in the world, the suffering and the chaos and the destruction and war and famine and disease. What are you going to say to make that better? Because people suffer not because of their own sin. A lot of times it's because of their own sin. But people suffer because of the choices that others make. People who had nothing to do with the original problem, who have to deal with the consequence of living in a sinful, fallen world. We keep reading in verse 18, Lamentations 2:18. "The heart cried out to the Lord, O wall of the daughter of Zion. Let tears stream down like a torrent, day and night. Give yourself no rest, your eyes no respite. Arise, cry out in the night. At the beginning of the night watches, pour out your heart like water before the presence of the Lord. Lift your hands to him for the lives of your children who faint for hunger at the head of every street. Look, O Lord, and see. With whom have you dealt thus? Should women eat the fruit of their womb, and the children of their tender care? Should priest and prophet be killed in the sanctuary of the Lord?" Obviously, the answer is no. These things should not be happening. Why are they happening? Because sin has consequence, and the consequence of sin is not limited to those who sin. That is a fundamental part of living in a fallen world, that people suffer through no fault of their own. And if that doesn't make you weep, what will? If that doesn't make you feel so broken inside because people suffer under incredible weight of difficulty and sorrow, and if you can look around and have no emotional reaction, what does that say about us? If we could see what's going on in the world and see that people are suffering because they live in a fallen world, there is consequence, there is brokenness, that should break you a bit. It should cause you to weep and wail and lament. Does the suffering of others cause you to feel any sorrow? Hey, Tristan, you're going to have to advance it for me because this thing is not working anymore. All right, does it work? Oh, we got it. We got it back. Hooray for us. Never mind. Does the suffering of others cause you to feel compassion and sorrow? And again, I really want to emphasize this. Here's the problem. A lot of times we look at people that are suffering, and it could be any number of things. We look at people who have lost their job, their family is broken, they have health problems, and what do we immediately assume? A lot of times, not always, but a lot of times, what do we immediately assume? Well, they must have done something wrong, right? Don't we immediately assume that? Oh, you lost your job, you must have not done something good. You're struggling to pay your bills. Well, you must not be working hard enough. Your family is broken. Well, were you a good parent? But ultimately, a lot of suffering in the world is not because people make bad choices. It's because we live in a broken world. We have to be careful not to assume, very careful not to assume, that we understand why people are suffering the way that they are. You look at Lamentations, you look at the suffering of Israel, you look at what's going on in the city. Children in the city who don't have enough to eat, guess what? It's not because they made bad choices, and it's not even because their parents made bad choices, but because we live in a world where sin's consequence expands beyond the original sinner. It's easy to read a book like Lamentations and really come away in despair, and we look around at the suffering of the world, we look around at what happens all the time. It's easy to lose sight of God's holiness and hope. And this is why the book is structured the way that it is in such, I think, an important way. Lamentations 1 and 2, 22 verses about suffering and horribleness. Lamentations 3, 66 verses. It does have some about suffering and consequence, but ultimately Lamentations 3, the middle of the book, is about hope. And it's about remembering that even though things are horrible, even though things do go wrong, even though people are suffering, there is ultimately hope in that suffering. Lamentations 3, verse 19 through 27 is not what's on the screen. I don't know what's on the screen. That's obviously a typo because there's no way that's 8 verses on there. Lamentations 3, beginning in verse 19. Remember my affliction and my wanderings, the wormwood and the gall. My soul continually remembers it and is bowed down within me, but this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. He starts this. I am thinking a lot about suffering. I'm thinking a lot about sorrow. There's a lot of bad things that have happened, right? That's what the author is remembering as he's thinking about Jerusalem. Yeah, obviously, I look around me and I can't help but see all the bad stuff in life. I can't help but see all the suffering that people have. I can't help but think about it, but I call this to mind. This is my hope. What is it? We just sang the song, right? The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore I will hope in him. It's easy to sing that song when things are going well, right? Love that song. Great song. Love never ends. Awesome. Remember that this is being written as people have been starving for 2 years, as the city has been broken into and burned, the walls have been broken down, people have been carried away into exile, and the writer is looking around and he's seeing all of this horror, all of this destruction, all of this nastiness. But he calls to mind the steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. Well, it certainly feels like they've come to an end. It certainly feels like his love has ceased as I look around and I see the suffering of those around me and myself. Where is God? Where is his mercy? Where is his love? They are new every morning. I do not think that most of us probably have the spiritual fortitude to write something like this in that kind of situation. But we talked about this morning in class better faith in Hebrews. We look at Hebrews 11 and all the people who had such great faith. This is a great example of this, of a belief, a trust that God will make things better even though I see such horror around me. Even though I see such suffering and agony and pain, I look around and I see all the horrible things that people do to each other. I still trust that God's mercy doesn't end. His love never ends. That there is new opportunities for mercy and compassion and faithfulness. Verse 34, Lamentations 3:34. To crush underfoot all the prisoners of the earth, to deny a man justice in the presence of the Most High, to subvert a man in his lawsuit the Lord does not approve. Talking about sinful behavior, right? Sin has consequences. Who has spoken and it came to pass unless the Lord has commanded it? Is it not from the mouth of the Most High that good and bad come? Why should a living man complain, a man about the punishment of his sins? Go back to the quote around deserved. We look around at suffering that is deserved. And ultimately the question becomes, who deserves punishment? Who deserves wrath? Everyone who sins. You deserve it. I deserve it. I deserve, because I have broken the law of the universe written by its creator, I deserve consequence. We understand that, right? We get that. People who do the wrong thing, they deserve to be punished. It goes back to God's sense of justice, our sense of justice. I know, deep down, I know that wrongdoing warrants consequence. So I look around and I see the consequence of sin, and the writer here saying, why should a living man complain about the punishment of his sins? The answer is we complain because we also have God's sense of mercy. We complain because we also have God's sense of compassion and grace, or should. We should. A lot of times we close our hearts, don't we? we close our hearts to that compassion and that mercy. We keep reading. Let us examine and test our ways. Let us return to the Lord. Let us lift up our hearts and hands to God in heaven. We have transgressed and rebelled, and you have not forgiven. The consequence of sin in the world that causes so much sorrow and grief and pain ultimately should, in the life of the Christian, above and beyond anything else, should motivate self-examination. How am I contributing to sorrow in the world? How am I contributing to the consequence of sin? How am I, put any one thing you want in there, whatever thing that we're doing, whatever it is that we're doing that's not what God wants. And again, the answer is, why should a living man complain over the punishment of a sin? You're getting what you deserve. We complain because we want mercy. And we see that the consequence of sin expands far beyond those who do the wrong thing. We often wonder why God doesn't intervene more precisely. God, you're all-knowing, you're all-powerful, you're all-loving. Why not make it so that only the evil suffer for their own wrongdoing? Why not intervene more directly, more precisely, to make sure that only those who deserve it are suffering? And the answer is, really, first of all, he will do that. That's going to happen. It's not happening yet, but eventually God will very precisely intervene, and only those who deserve the consequence of wrongdoing get that consequence. He has promised to make that right. But secondly, the primary message of the gospel is this: God doesn't want people to get what they deserve. He doesn't want that. And you shouldn't either. You should not want people to get what they deserve. The suffering of Jerusalem, the consequence of sin that God told them over and over and over, that was not limited to just the sinners, because the consequences of sin are far-reaching. And that is how it works on earth. In heaven, it won't. In heaven, there will be no spillover. There will be no sort of blast zone where a lot of people outside of the sinners get consequence. That's not going to be in heaven. On the other hand, if you want to get to heaven, you have to forsake your sense of justice. You have to forsake your sense of deservedness, because you don't deserve to be there. None of us do. Our lives will only be evangelistic then, and ultimately what I want you to take away from this lesson. Our lives will only be evangelistic if you lament for the lost and those who are suffering, rather than close your hearts. If sin does not cause you sorrow, if you see the suffering of others, then that does not cause you to mourn and grieve, you will not be evangelistic. You will not tell people about Jesus. You will not tell people about the gospel unless sin causes you to mourn, and unless its consequences causes you to grieve. Maybe because of anger, you don't deserve forgiveness. Maybe because of callousness, because you don't care about the pain of others. But Lamentations, hard though it is to read, is a good reminder of exactly what God's wrath looks like. His wrath looks like the worst thing you've ever seen in your life. Isn't that eventually what his wrath will bring about? The destruction of Jerusalem is terrible. It's nothing compared to eternity. The destruction of Israel and all the siege and the famine, and that's all bad. It's nothing compared to what is coming. And if I close my heart to the suffering of others, I will not be motivated to try to save people from that wrath to come. As we've been going through the prophets, we conclude this sermon. We're ending a series on the prophets. We've really been going through the prophetic books over the last several months, really, in our story through the Bible. What motivated the prophets ultimately was they saw God's judgment coming. They saw wrath that was coming. They saw the consequence of sin coming. And what did they do about it? They warned people over and over and over. They told people, this is coming. We need to change. We need to make things better. We need to repent. We need to turn back to God. We need to make things right. Because looking back on Lamentations is the result of what happens when people don't make things right. When people don't turn away from their sin, when people don't come back to God. Lamentations is the result, or should be, if you have the right attitude about sin. I want to encourage you this week, as we're going to sing this invitation song in a minute, I would encourage you this week to think about the people in your life, your friends, your neighbors, your coworkers, the suffering that they have because of sin, either self-imposed or not, does it move you at all? Does it cause you to sadness at all? And if it does, what are you doing with that sadness? Is it motivating you to try to reach out with the gospel? Is it motivating you to try to make their lives better, to help in tangible, physical ways? Is it motivating you to try to help people see that in God we have hope and we have forgiveness and we have redemption? I hope it is, because sorrow without action is despair, and it's ultimately pointless. It's the thing that separated Judas and Peter, isn't it? A sorrow that did not lead to action versus a sorrow that led ultimately to repentance. We offer the invitation. Jesus calls, come to him, because in him is that hope and forgiveness and mercy. If you're ready, come while we stand and sing.